You're listening to Second Cut. This is the weekly podcast from thefilmmagazine.com, where we explore topics in film criticism and theory through movie reviews. I'm Jacob, and let's get rid of Kieran's picture because he's actually here. I'm the one whose camera works the whole time. So, guys, speaking of the new technology, I'm stupid and I forgot to unmute my audio that is streaming y'all's voices. So can you reintroduce yourselves and then restate what films you were just talking about?
So what you're saying is we've got about 10 minutes of a live stream that was pointless.
Well, more like 4 or 5, but yes. Sam.
I was talking about The Flash and how it probably deserved to fail because it didn't know the kind of movie it was going to be, and it had to be redone so many different times, various different reasons, some Ezra Miller related and some not.
Yes, and who are you?
I'm Sam, and I can't be bothered repeating all that. I'm just Sam today.
Thank you, Sam. Okay. Kieran.
I'm just Kieran today, and I was the one that was talking about how Indiana Jones 5 didn't deserve the absolute hate it got, and only making...
Because it's okay.
Yeah, it's not awful. It's certainly no Crystal Skull, but it ain't the top 3. But, you know, it should have done better than Meg 2 at the box office, and I don't see why it didn't. And you're saying how bad The Flash did. I'm looking at Box Office Mojo's numbers now, and it's number 16 so far, 16th highest grossing. Just making 40 mil, about 47 mil less at 233 mil. The Nun 2. If you've not got 40 mil more than The Nun 2 in a massive superhero thing with the return of Michael Keaton's Batman, you've done something massively wrong. Not that we should be saying that superhero movies should be the ones that get all the applause, but at this point in time, realistically, you should have just gone, Michael Keaton's back as Batman, and it's like at least $500,000 easy without batting an eyelid. And the fact he didn't is ridiculous. And
I'm Jacob. You heard me earlier, but I'm the one who deeply apologizes to my co-hosts for not playing their audio.
Don't worry, we'll cut it out in the edit.
Yes, I will cut it. Yeah, that's the great thing about this is I have one audio track to edit, and they're very, very minimal cuts that I need to make this an audio podcast.
There'll be a hell of a big one next time.
Still smaller than it used to be. My pick is Batman vs. Superman, and if you want my thoughts on it, I wrote an incomplete series on the Film Magazine for my first articles that I wrote. So go check those out. Spoiler, I hate it. It is bad and dumb and stupid.
It is.
All right. So we're going to get into our famous film flops. We've got 3 whoppers. Was mine the shortest at 2 hours 50?
Yes, it was. By quite some distance. Yours is just over 30 minutes shorter than mine. I think the cut of Heaven's Gate I watched cocked in at about 3 hours 25, I think.
Okay. Yeah, do you know which cut that was?
The second cut.
Very good. The one from about 10 years ago. The one that's meant to closely approximate Cimino's original vision. So, yeah.
And Kieran?
And I put myself to probably the granddaddy of like going back in the past historical blockbuster flops and did Cleopatra, which the version we've got now, the most complete version, is just over 4 hours long. But there is the original cut before it got to cinemas was around 6 hours long. And there's been many things over the years to try and find the additional footage, and then I just went, thank God they haven't found it. I'm sorry, I can't do it.
So it's like Greed, but from the golden age of Hollywood. I was trying to see if the mythic 8-hour cut exists today after hearing Scorsese talk about the assembly cut of his movie.
Before we get into our 3 films, shall we play a little game of higher and lower? I've got a of the top 10 biggest box office bombs of all time, adjusted for inflation.
All right.
No,
I need to make a graphic for this.
Now, I think
If only we'd planned this.
About half of them come from Disney or Disney subsidiaries or Disney or companies Disney own now.
That is shocking.
A monopoly. Yeah. So out of these three, so let's go for Tomorrowland, Lone Ranger, and John Carter. Which do you think is one of these is the biggest money loser, just for inflation, box office wise, of all time?
That's commonly put down to John Carter at Mars. And unless I heard anything different, I'm going to go with John Carpenter and Mars for biggest flop of all time.
I do want to see John Carpenter of Mars.
That's called Ghost of Mars, and that was awful as well.
I'm going to go with that answer because Kieran said it.
Yeah, and you'd be right, yes. So John Carter reportedly lost Disney $255 million.
Oh my.
Adjusting for inflation.
Closely followed by the Lone Ranger at $239 million. And Tomorrowland was quite modest in comparison, $185 million loss.
Like, Tomorrowland wasn't the worst movie in history. It wasn't good, but it wasn't like the absolute trash everyone seems to think it was. It was some nice visuals. And you get to see George Clooney beat up Hugh Laurie. Like, who doesn't want to see a fist fight between George Clooney and Hugh Laurie? So, I don't know what the issue is.
Yeah, so true. The biggest loser for Universal was Battleship, which I've still never seen.
Yeah.
that was Rihanna in that one.
I think so, yeah. That's about all I know about it.
Yeah,
I hate to see that.
That was Universal, $191 million, about 10 years ago. Funny enough, there's no Marvel or DC stuff on this. Even the stuff owned by Disney and Warner Brothers, there's no superhero stuff on like the biggest money losers. I mean, the Flash and I think the Suicide Squad, they're down in like the top 20, I think, money losers, but nowhere near like the top 10. The kind of historical kind of subgenre revival films, which do you think lost more, Cutthroat Island or The 13th Warrior? I don't know if you've seen either of them. Cutthroat Island.
I haven't. I've heard of Cutthroat Island.
I'm going to go with The 13th Warrior before Kieran can give the correct answer.
I vaguely heard of Cutthroat Island. Is that the one that essentially stopped pirate movies for about 10 years?
Basically, yeah. About 10 years before Pirates of the Caribbean, they tried doing a similar thing, and it just didn't work at all.
Yeah, and everyone was worried about Caribbean because they were just like, pirate movies are dead. Just don't do it. And somehow it worked.
This was the film that basically sank Carolco, which you'd think would be a pretty bulletproof company considering all the crap they put out over the years. So the 13th Warrior lost Disney again, because it was Touchstone, lost Disney $227 million, and Cutthroat Island lost Carolco/MGM $202 million. So
it is slightly terrifying that studios can lose that amount of money and in a certain way it not faze them.
Yeah.
Like, how much do you think Disney would have to lose for it to be a serious concern to their business? Like,
north of $1 billion, surely. Like, I reckon it'd have to be tens of billions, because at a certain point you don't have to pump anything out. You just sit there and get the money back off the merch.
I mean, just last year, Strange World, Disney's new animated feature, that lost them $197 million. I don't think that they helped themselves, but with their model at that time, because it was still a case of it's like it'll be on Disney Plus like 12 weeks later, So I think a lot of people just didn't go for it, and But yes, it's as you say, it is just obscene. Just the amount that companies these studios are willing to spend on films, and then the amount it doesn't affect them if they lose like a lot of it on it. Yeah, it's just. And
I mean, to a certain extent, like it's kind of the studio's fault, because that's what they were saying about Indiana Jones 5. It's like, well, don't make it for that amount of money. Then don't make movies for 250 mil, because if it doesn't make that amount of money, then you're screwed. And to be honest, a lot of the stuff now, quite a bit of it is going towards the actors. Because the actors are asking for like 15, 20 mil a time. What was it Downey Jr. got for Spider-Man Homecoming? Something like he was on screen for about 10 minutes and he got paid about 15 million or something ridiculous like that.
Yeah, sounds about right. Yeah.
Yeah, well, there are tons of forces, of course, that go into creating these flops. And I think these three films are going to be, a good case study on the various, structural and critical forces that really plagued these movies, both with audiences and critics in their own ways. So I don't know how similar they'll end up being or how different, but I do know there are some crossover points that could be made about each. And we're going to go chronologically. So, Kieran, tell us a little bit about Cleopatra.
Cleopatra is one of those ones that is, I think, kind of more famous now for everything that just went ridiculously wrong behind the scenes rather than the actual film itself. It's kind of throw everything together for like the ultimate kind of progression for about 5 or 6 years of anything that can go wrong will go wrong, and it like ended up being Cleopatra. So originally it was 20th Century Fox who had been going for about 25 years at this point. I think they started in the mid-30s, if my head isn't that far off. And bearing in mind that not that long before the US government essentially stripped all the US production companies of their cinema distributions, so that they weren't getting money from that, and TV was now starting to get into people's houses, so cinema audiences were declining from that as well. And 20th Century Fox essentially were looking for stuff that they had to make. And they came across a 1917 silent version of the film called Cleopatra, which I have not seen, admittedly. And essentially, in amongst all these scripts and things they were bringing back, they were told the people who are going to make it, get this out, because it's a silent, all it'll take is a couple of bits of tweaking, and we can pump it out. Yeah, like that happened. So one of the producers that went onto it, who kind of turned up and went, I would like to make this movie, or a movie called Cleopatra, they just have to be looking at it. It's called Walter Wanger, who had an amazing history anyway. He produced stuff like, what had he done? He'd been a producer on Stagecoach with John Ford in 1939. He'd done Foreign Correspondent, the Alfred Hitchcock movie in 1940. And then in 1951, I think it was, his wife, Joan Bennett, he essentially, I'm not actually sure if she was having an affair or he just thought she was having an affair, but he essentially got a gun, went up to them in a car and shot the person, Jennings Lang, I believe his name was, who's Joan Bennett's agent, shot him where it would hurt a guy the most, essentially.
Oh my.
He got temporary insanity and 4 months in prison. But essentially his major kind of, 1 or 2 produced films a year went downhill after that. Although he did somehow a couple of years after do the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which is like, wait, what? And then he comes out with I Want to Live with Susan Hayward, who gets the best Oscar. So it's not like he's behind like small stuff even afterwards. But then he eventually comes and does Cleopatra, and essentially 20th Century Fox went, oh my god, coincidence, go, do it. Originally it was going to be a 2 mil budget. I'm going to have to cram so much of this in because it's just ridiculous what goes on. But the kind of big thing initially is the hiring of Elizabeth Taylor, who is becoming a big star at the time, and apparently she was in London, and they wanted a load of other people for the role of Cleopatra, the Queen of the Nile, and Walter Wanger really wanted Elizabeth Taylor. Was throwing out all these other, Oscar winners and things like that, and Oscar nominees, and that the 20th Century Fox are suggesting. And apparently Walter Wanger eventually rang up Elizabeth Taylor, and I think it was her husband or somebody else answered the phone and figured it was like, I really want you to play Cleopatra. And apparently Elizabeth Taylor kind of yelled from the other room roughly, say you'll hire me for $1 million and I'll do it. And Walter Wagner went, okay. And it was the first time in at least, as far as I know, Western history that anybody had been offered or got paid $1 million for a single movie at the time. So this was massive. Nobody had been paid $1 million, and in roughly today's money, that's about $10 million. So that happens. They get in about 3 writers over like the next years. The budget keeps going up. They start to film in, and the original budget was $2 million. So that's about 20 mil now. They originally go to England because they're going to use Pinewood. Elizabeth Taylor wants to shoot in places like Rome, and they essentially go to places like Pinewood because at the time the government had a scheme where if you get enough of the cast and crew to be British, they'll do some tax work essentially and put some money in for it. So that was the idea. They build massive sets, shoot a load of footage with the director at the time, who was Ruben Mamolin, who had done some films. I think the previous film he did that, or the last film we did, was Silk Stockings with Fred Astaire in it. So he's worked with big names before, and he's got all this building up massive sets on Pinewood lot. But Elizabeth Taylor had ill health throughout her life and was fairly frail kind of health-wise. British weather didn't suit her. So she was essentially laid up in a hotel bed for months, and at one point she got pneumonia. She was like rushed into hospital, had to have like emergency tracheotomies at the time, like really like life or death kind of thing. Eventually, she was taken back to the US, and after about 6 months and about $5 million worth of the time, essentially they went, "This isn't working." Destroyed the sets, so they had like the entirety of like the Roman kind of like Forum and Palladium or whatever it is built on Pinewood for $5 million now, which I think roughly money-wise times it by 10, so about a $50 million set, roughly, and that's killing. They weren't going to be filming there anymore. So there's that, and then like years go on. The original people are going to play Caesar and Octavian lead. They keep Rex Harrison, but then also, the money by this point is still going up and up and up. They're getting new directors in. The new director is Joseph Mankiewicz, who won Oscars for directing A Letter to Three Wives in 1949, and he wrote All About Eve. 51 Oscars, so very well-respected filmmaker. He was kind of editing and doing scripts along, so the script was constantly changing. They eventually got in Richard Burton to play Mark Antony, and this is where the madness happens even more so. Elizabeth Taylor had lost her husband, third husband, I think it was Mike Todd, in an airplane crash, and was married to somebody else who I forgot the name of as well when she was on Cleopatra. Bearing in mind, they're now going all over the place. The budget is still spiraling up out of nowhere.
By the way, Kieran, sorry to interrupt, but that story is, you can watch it in the Lindsay Lohan, whatever her name is, film, Elizabeth Taylor. And
okay.
Yeah, it's actually a pretty cool take on that period.
Yeah, it's ridiculous because they're all in marriages, everything's going up, and then Richard Burton finally gets onto set. Apparently they'd met earlier, but then this time, and Elizabeth Taylor hadn't really liked him. Richard Burton comes on this time, and apparently he had a massive hangover, like so shaking he could hardly like drink coffee. And apparently Elizabeth Taylor had to help him drink a cup of coffee. Apparently at that moment he was so vulnerable and everything, they just fell for each other like that. They're both in marriages at the time. There's like on set, there's like, it's so well known what is going on. Now the paparazzi of Italy are like on them. It's, Elizabeth Taylor is already known as a bit of a homewrecker. The Vatican is denouncing them as like, sinful people. Like the Pope is telling off the main actors of this thing. Not only that, it's now going on massively. They're pumping more and more money into it. They don't know how they're going to survive. Bear in mind, this is meant to be $2 million. It's now getting up towards 25, 30 mil. They're having to do years later, like a year or two later, they're having to do reshoots of the initial battle scenes because they thought it looked cheap and nasty when they're having to finish it up for a little bit of money. when they eventually kind of get all the stuff, apparently, and Mankiewicz, who was also brought on to write as well, he's kind of writing scenes as he goes. They're using scenes as he's writing them, so it's not in order. Normally, you'd get all your locations or your actors and you block it off like that to say moving around. They're kind of leaving sets for months and then coming back to it later because everything's changing by the minute and the second. Yeah. The original cut ends up being like 6 hours long. Like the people at the studio heads are firing Wenger at some point to try and get a new cut in. So you've got writers that have been fired at some point, a producer that's been fired at some point, one of the directors got fired at some point. Some of your main actors have left years ago. Ill health, everything. Originally, they wanted, I think Wenger wanted to try and make it 2 films, each about 3 hours long, to have one with Cleopatra and Julius Caesar, and then one with Cleopatra and Mark Antony, which is kind of how Shakespeare did it and George Bernard Shaw did it as well. But essentially, 20th Century Fox went, there is so much press around Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor. If we bring out Cleopatra and Julius Caesar now, what happens if nobody cares about Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor 7 months' time when we bring out the second one? We've got to cut it down to 4 hours. So Wenger was, cut off, and he still railed about how they, ripped me off to try and get this cut on. It eventually goes down to 4 hours. They release it out, and essentially after 1 or 2 test screens, I think it is, or I think it goes out in the 4-hour cut in the US, but they cut it down to 3 hours for the UK release. Because if it's 4 hours long, you can only get in 1 showing an evening. So they cut it down to about 3 hours to try and get 2 showings in and just about work the times. Now, the original cut was about 6 hours long. Half the people are like, I'm not going to be in this movie anymore. And Elizabeth Taylor apparently saw the 3-hour one about halfway through, walked out and threw up in the lavatories, and then was slagging off the film the entire time. So yeah, massive, just cluster from hell behind the scenes. And most people think it was a massive, massive flop. In terms of the actual box office stuff, because I took some notes down, the initial profit was around 26 million, which adjusted is roughly about 260, 270 million. So, not far off Indiana Jones, And realistically, 270 mil wasn't that awful. And please remember, this is 1963. The cinema going public is less. We've already said that, TV is having a massive impact. There's just not as many people because populations have surged since then. So even now, you'd probably get another 100, 200 mil probably off it anyway. And you've got social media for the buzz like that. The campaigns are. Apparently, there were squabbles behind the scenes as well because they had a big painted poster in Times Square of Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor. And then somebody pointed out in the contract, it said Rex Harrison had to have equal promotional value. So they had to go and repaint this massive, 50-foot, I don't know how big it is, all these massive kind of billboards to paint in Rex Harrison back in because of contracts. Anyway.
And no one needs to see Rex Harrison that big.
No. Realistically, so it makes a half decent amount of money, and it was one of the top. It was top 3 or 4 of the year. Millions went to see it. It was a phenomenon at the time. There are things in Playboy and all the newspapers for years. It was a phenomenon. The trouble was, the budget eventually got to 44 million, which in today's money is about 420 million. Which, bearing in mind, not adjusted for inflation, I think Pirates of the Caribbean 2 has the current record of about 450 mil spent on it, or 400 mil, something around there. Although only 44 mil is actually spent, it's probably doubled up. It's roughly around the same amount. So it's coming on, adjusted for inflation, one of the most expensive movies ever made. And it's not that it didn't get the people in, it's just they spent so much money. Again, Elizabeth Taylor got paid 1 mil of that. 5 mil got spent on a British set that nothing was used, no footage was used in the final cut. It's 4 hours long. And then at the end of the day, it's a mediocre movie. Here's the bit that I review it. It's It looks great. Elizabeth Taylor, is great in it. Burton's good. Rex Harrison's great. It looks astonishing. It is a gorgeous looking movie. It won 4 Oscars. It won Best Art Direction. It won Best Cinematography in Color, because they were splitting it up back then, 1963. It won Best Costume in Color. It won Best Special Effects. It got nominated for Best Picture, Best Actor, Best Editing, Best Music, Best Sound. Like, it got 9 Oscar noms and won 4. So it's not a flop in kind of the awards standards. It's not a flop technically in the amount of money it made. It's just the fact it was so expensive and ridiculous that, like, it didn't make it back and is known as a flop. And the fact it's, like, some people, New York Times said it was one of the great epics of our day. Variety called it, a super colossal Eiffel. It's big historical epic, big wides, massive sets. It looks glorious. And then you get people like the Times saying, Cleopatra's riddled with flaws, and the Chicago Tribune calling it huge and disappointing. And the trouble is, even at 4 hours long, with an intermission at the 2-hour mark, it's still a slog.
Is there an intermission on the streaming copies?
I don't know. I got, thankfully, a DVD copy from my university library, which is very nicely split it up into 2 discs at the intermission part. But
imagine how many VHS, like probably 4 of them.
Yeah, like to be honest, I reckon if you want to save, if you've got a really long movie that you think might not do well, find a midpoint and put an intermission in. Build it in. I can guarantee you a good chunk of people will go to the cinema purely because it's the novelty factor of it having an intermission. Tell them there's an intermission. Christopher Nolan, if you're listening, this might be a way. Scorsese, if you're listening, because your movies tend to be about 3 hours plus, build an intermission in and people will go purely if they don't care.
Killers of Flower Moon is 3 hours 20. I looked it up earlier on today and I was thinking that's going to be, even if I'm enjoying it, that's going to be a tough sit in the cinema.
Also, Taylor Swift, The Eras Tour. It's like, it's Avengers length.
Yeah, like, we don't need that. But yeah, so that's back in the day, and Cleopatra is still kind of, there's some glorious moments in it. They're kind of one of the main sequences where Cleopatra arrives in Rome for the first time. And there's a good 5-minute sequence of this procession of, like, dancing and, all these elaborate things. And then there's a massive, like, 30-foot tall, like 30-foot, probably like 50-foot long Sphinx that's rolled in and Elizabeth Taylor sat on it. It's just purely iconic, pure like blockbuster before there is blockbuster. It's just a shame that it's 4 hours long and it drags, and it's like 2 movies. And if it was done now, it would be a limited series, like minimum. You just can't do it.
Yeah, I mean, my abiding memory of the whole film, I have seen it once, but not for years, is that scene where she's coming into Rome, with like the big kind of parade and everything around her.
Sphinx, yeah.
Yeah, it's just that is, as you say, that's what cinema's made for. That is the biggest spectacle you possibly have, and all done for real and in camera and everything. It's incredible, but there's a long time to wait leading up to that, and there's a long time to get through after that point.
Yeah, it's just that's the sad thing. So it's one of those ones where I bet somebody on YouTube will do like a 2-hour cut or something like that, and you'll try. The trouble is, there is so much plot and stuff in there that it's quite hard to cut it down any further, just because like it naturally needs to sprawl. And again, they were kind of making it up and writing it as they went along. There wasn't really a proper script. It was just kind of scenes that they were writing out of order and throwing together and hopefully editing together. There was a point where they fired the director. The studio fired the director because he was cutting it, and then they realized they weren't actually sure how to fit it together, so a month later they rehired the director to cut it properly because they weren't sure how to actually put it all together. So if you want any kind of understanding on how just like everything goes wrong behind the scenes to make something ridiculously stupid, then this is where you go. And I am reminded, thinking about the British set, just as a final note, of us doing Sahara, where they had, like a $10 million sequence for about 2 minutes of footage. in the desert at one point. So they're not learning very much. And it's a wonder why. But then again, I think that was that. Who did that? That might have been 20th century, actually.
I've blocked all of that out of my memory.
Let me just double check. Horror movie. It was Summit Entertainment. Oh, that's Paramount. Okay, we'll go 20th century. But yeah, so that is Cleopatra. It's an interesting one if you've got an awful long time, and very nicely, it's got an intermission built in for you at the 2-hour mark, so you can go and, I don't know, decide not to watch the second half if you want to at that point. You've watched them come into Rome at that point. That's really the bit you want, and everything else after that. Again, it looks gorgeous, but it's just really slow.
Yeah, I actually have not seen it, so maybe I'm not missing out on anything.
Yeah, watch the YouTube clips of the good bits, and there.
Yeah, I do like sword and sandal epics. You know, they're
Yeah.
the idea of them is cool. I like Alexander. We had that thrown in our chat earlier, and but Kieran,
FYI, Alexander lost 110 million. I've got just.
Well, I hope he finds it.
Out of my notes.
Kieran, ours have very similar behind the scenes stories, and Sam, ours have very similar anatomy, post-mortem sorts of things about them. But New York from Martin Scorsese is really his first kind of big budget film. He was coming off of Taxi Driver, which was, obviously critically and financially successful. He won the Palme d'Or for it at Cannes, and his other, up to that point, most successful film was his first Hollywood film, which was Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. He had 1 or 2 Academy Award nominations for his performers in that, and then obviously De Niro was nominated for Taxi Driver. And so in 1977, he releases this big budget musical inspired by, in the style of, the grand golden age of Hollywood musicals, particularly those from the 1940s, which is when the film takes place. It starts on VJ Day, and then there's a time skip where it ends up in the 1950s. And it follows Robert De Niro, who plays the saxophonist Jimmy Doyle, and Liza Minnelli, who plays the singer Francine Evans. And the two of them fall into this sort of volatile romance. And it's very, very tragic, their story. And I think particularly for this film, something that makes it maybe not so popular among audiences is that De Niro's character is, to quote a film character, a top pain in the ass. He's a real jerk. And he is throughout the entire movie. And there's hardly any redeemable qualities about him compared to, film heels that Scorsese discussed as influences from those 1940s films. And, of course, a lot of that has to do with the production code and what audiences were willing to accept at that period. Just in general, films were way more artifice than they were depictions of real life. And not that American New Wave films were depictions of real life, but they're a bit more realistic in terms of like the emotionality and the darkness of situations, which is something that we see in this film. So it was made on a $14 million budget, which is about $71 million in today's money. I looked up Meet Me in St. Louis, and Good News. Those are two of the huge 40s musicals. Meet Me in St. Louis, of course, starring Judy Garland. And I think those were both about $21 to $26 million in budget. So, we're looking at a threefold increase going from those movies to this movie. And it ended up making 16.4 million. So not doing the 2.5 times, not meeting the marketing, just barely breaking the budget of the film that has been publicly stated. So behind the scenes for the exciting tabloid stuff, Scorsese was using a ton of cocaine at this point. He was like Henry Hill at the end of Goodfellas.
Scorsese, the cocaine years.
Yes. And the reason he did it, I read an interview, I think it was with The Hollywood Reporter. He did it to get the creative juices flowing. He just started using drugs because a lot of his friends were. I don't know if he knew Stephen King at that point in time, but they probably would have gotten along.
The Shining came out in 76, so he probably wasn't massively on the way. The book was published in 76, and Carrie, the film, was released in 76, so I don't think King would have been massively on the wave yet.
If King was hanging out with De Palma, then Scorsese was at least aware of him. So this movie, the other thing going on behind the scenes was that Scorsese, who was married, from a source that I read, to an alcoholic, and she was pregnant at the time, which is a theme within the film, an unhappy marriage with a pregnancy. He begins an affair with the married Liza Minnelli, who is having another affair with somebody else. So that was all, very... what's the word? Scandalous at the time, and was being reported on. And so United Artists was like, much like the other movie, we got to get this movie out there. We got to just get it out the door. Scorsese, in the director's commentary, he was talking about just how tired he was at the end of it. And within the plot, so kind of the way it goes is, the two meet on a very, exciting day, VJ Day, Victory in Japan Day, and she denies his advances, and he's a very smooth talking kind of, con artist sort of figure, where he's like, hey, don't you, we met somewhere, we had a conversation, and she's like, no. Okay, well, can I have your number? No. This is in the trailer, by the way. This part where she's saying no, 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 over and over again. Finally, they end up running into each other at a hotel. She finds out that he was scamming the hotel. And I guess it's just his charm, his allure that he does have, which I don't count as redeemable qualities, but they are the enjoyable and sort of comedic qualities about De Niro's very intense portrayal. Whereas Liza Minnelli is sort of just, a woman trying to exist, and it's very much, I don't know if it's an intentional illustration, but it becomes an illustration of the effects of, violent men on women who are just trying to be normal and happy. And so whenever he was cutting the film, his editor died, by the way, in the process of making the film. So he went and got Marcia Lucas, who had been cutting Star Wars. And so George was not happy about his wife being pulled away to a more prestige project. And she was like, yeah, no, it's a way better offer. I'm going to go cut this movie with him. One thing somebody told him, so that the two meet. This is vital to getting to how the film was cut. They meet. They get married in an impromptu wedding. She gets pregnant. He doesn't want the baby. And they had been traveling on the road with the band. Well, now they go back to New York instead of traveling on the road together with the band. And finally, she has the baby. De Niro leaves. He's not in the kid's life. I guess he is a little bit from a distance, but the way they talk about it, it's like he's just completely walking out on them. And it's like at the end of La La Land, Minnelli's a big star, and De Niro owns a club where he plays his saxophone and appreciates his jazz. But in the portion where Liza Minnelli's character is coming up, becoming more famous, she's in a movie. And it's a not full movie, but we get the, abbreviated version of a 1940s musical within the film. And so my initial thought was, oh, people thought that this was weird and jarring and messed up the flow of the movie. Well, actually, Scorsese cut that out of the film completely. So what ends up happening with the two characters is they don't get back together. He calls and says, hey, let's go get Chinese food. And if you think that's a good idea, come outside. And she doesn't. She goes up in an elevator. She does not go outside to him, and he walks away. And the thing about the movie within the movie is it's called Happy Endings, and it has a moment where the character who's wannabe singer, it mirrors the film's plot, of course. She wants to be a singer, meets whatever they're called, Broadway producer, and she becomes a famous singer. She wakes up. It was all a dream, but then she meets the producer anyway, and so it's a happy ending. They're going to fall in love, get back together. There's a period, too, where they separate, and then they come back together after she has become famous. So in the second run of the film, which I guess was still in the 70s, they wanted United Artists wanted Marty to shorten the film so that they could get butts in seats, make as much back as they could. Which is definitely something United Artists did, and I will be coming back to that in my film. Yes. Fortunately, they still existed at this point. So he dropped a sequence that I thought was a little pointless, so I get why they cut it. That was in a club, and they left in some of the happy endings, but they still cut out parts of it. And finally, there was another cut in 1981, and this is after Sinatra had recorded and released his theme from New York, New York, which I didn't know that this was the song from the movie. I thought it was a Sinatra song, and then Scorsese made the movie about it.
It happens.
Yeah, so it turns out that he boosted the film's popularity a bit, and in 1981, Scorsese was allowed to restore the film to its full glory, his vision, and he released it. Only
took 4 years to be allowed a director's cut. Wow.
Yeah, right? For release in theaters. And he said that audiences actually liked that version more because it had the happy ending in it. You know, there was something for them to latch onto and go, yes, I feel good about this. And this sort of idea about the reception of the film's dour tone that it takes on. This is from Vincent Canby in the New York Times. He says, New York, New York is not a parody, but the original genre is really not interesting enough to have had all this attention to detail spent on it. It's not that the movie runs out of steam long before it has gone on for 2 hours and 33 minutes. So the shortened original version. But we have figured it out and become increasingly dumbfounded. Why should a man of Mr. Scorsese's talent be giving us what amounts to no more than a film buff's essay on a pop film form that was never, at any point in film history, of the first freshness? Even more disturbing is the movie's lack of feeling for the genuine feelings that those old movies were meant to inspire. So, what he's getting at there is that auteurism is bad, making films about films is kind of pointless, and on top of that, it completely moves away from what those films were really about, which is creating this feeling of joy and happiness and that everything is right in the world. But of course, that is the antithesis of that era of filmmaking, right? This is the people talk about The Dark Knight being the gritty Batman. This is the gritty musical. Yeah. It's incredibly dark. Like, De Niro's character at every turn is the worst person possible. Like, the only thing he could do that would make him worse is to actually abuse his child, which he never does. He's nice to the kid.
Sweeney Todd.
Yeah, B. Sweeney, commit murder, something like that.
To be honest, I've never got around to seeing a New York yet, and it's probably that's quite high top of my list now because I do like a bleak musical. I mean, I love Bob Fosse's stuff. I love all that jazz and cabaret and stuff like that. So I think this sounds like could be right up my alley.
Yeah,
And it has to be said, if you haven't seen it, I've probably mentioned it before, and you like your kind of slightly offbeat musicals, Anna and the Apocalypse is amazing.
That's awesome.
And if anyone hasn't seen it, it came out, 2017, 18, something like that. It is a British high school zombie Christmas musical. It's just like the magic you didn't know existed, and it's great fun and slightly tear-jerking as well.
Well, I'll point people to One from the Heart. We did that for episode 5, I believe. That is Francis Ford Coppola's attempt at a maybe modernist musical, not postmodernist musical, but who knows why they let him make that in the wake of this movie.
Isn't it just such a shame we will never get Tarantino making like a proper musical?
maybe he will. We don't know.
I think that should be the mark of like one of these great auteur directors. You have to make a ridiculous musical and survive.
Yeah, and I think that's really what the movie is getting at. Like it wants to show the realism of the lives of stars, like the people that we see playing music, starring in movies. Well, their lives are not the glamorous thing that we think they are. And that's reflected in Marty's own life during this period. He was going through some super dark, depressing moments in his life. And that is, especially for old Hollywood. Like, if people were watching, Fatty Arbuckle movies without knowing what he had done, it's just a completely different feeling that you have towards that actor and character. We see it now when we watch things with Kevin Spacey. We kind of have to go, oh, he sucks, but I love him in it.
I was going to say, there is a thing of, are we allowed to actually speak well of things like Usual Suspects and Seven and stuff like that? It's just like, it's dodgy. So would you say that the kind of successful failure of that was all Marty, or was a lot of it the studio interference?
Well, there wasn't really any studio interference, and so what the anti-auteur crowd, what they pointed to was that this is director freedom gone too far, and of course, it was really long. Like I'm sure people didn't want to go sit in a theater and watch a nearly 3-hour musical, I guess 2.5. But if you count the time that you spend before and after at the movies, it's a 3-hour experience. And then also the ending is arguably anticlimactic. Like, I really love it. It's very dark. It's very... I wouldn't say it's depressing, but it's just sort of a harsh reality that the happy endings don't really come together, especially for people who don't deserve them. We would hope, at least. It's sort of a redemption of the film in the way that it's portraying De Niro's character and framing the story around him. So, like, does this movie deserve what happened to it financially and critically? No, I don't think so. I think it is a good movie. I think it's representative of what new waves were about, which was, celebrating film and film history, making movies about movies. And something I've been reading about is the apolitical nature of that. So I'm looking forward to delving a bit more into how that movement was sort of motivated by people wanting to get sociological and political ideologies out of film. But you can't escape sociological perspectives, especially within this movie. There's so much to it about the relations between men and women. Especially like the idea of traditional masculinity and the role of the husband and father, where he's the one out making the money and the woman stays at home with the kid. Well, Liza Minnelli's character is not going to be that type of woman, and that really affects De Niro's character's ego in fascinating and interesting and entertaining ways, ultimately. So, that's New York, and it has been.
People, I was going to say, I was going to segue into the next one. If you're going to finish off on that.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's been reappraised, of course. And, within his filmography, it begins to make a lot more sense since he made Age of Innocence and other, I mean, to begin with, Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore is not his typical film. But this is exactly the kind of film that shows what Scorsese is, which is sort of an embodiment, a representative of film culture and film history. And yeah, I think this movie is effective in continuing to build that aspect of his character and perception. A line that sticks out for me from the rapper Lil Wayne, from his song "I'm Not a Human Being." I'm going to paraphrase because he uses some language. He says, "Rich person looking at the cops all crazy. That's that mob stuff, my friends. Martin Scorsese." When we think of Scorsese, we think of Goodfellas and Casino and Gangs of New York, but he's so much more than that. Of course, we know that. If you're listening to this, you probably know that. But I think this movie is a very genuine film from him in his early career, and it's interesting to hear his perspectives on it, both contemporaneously and then retroactively. So, yeah.
Speaking of one person taking control of a film like New York, New York, and then budgeting it out of absolute all proportion like Cleopatra, Sam, over to you to combine those two strands into one of the most infamous films ever made.
It's almost like we've thought all this through, from one United Artists flop to probably their biggest one of all time, so comes to Heaven's Gate. So basically, they handed Michael Cimino the keys to the kingdom after The Deer Hunter won 5 Oscars. Basically, look, fair play. It's a massive hit both at the box office and critically. You got Best Director, Best Picture, was Best Supporting Actor, and I can't remember the other 2. But 5 big Oscars. So we really admire, we really trust you. Do what you like. Do your dream projects. And so it would have it. Michael Cimino did have a dream project, and it was loosely based on the Johnson County War, which I would never have heard of if it wasn't for this film. I don't know about you, Jacob, whether you would have heard of the Johnson County War.
No, not outside of this film.
No.
So, I do live in Johnson County, Texas, though, but different state.
Yeah, not Johnson County, Wyoming.
Fortunately, thank God.
So, basically, Heaven's Gate, it's the aim was to, I think Cimino's aim was, and I've seen a few sources quoting this, he wanted this to be the Gone with the Wind or the Lawrence of Arabia of American Westerns. He wanted that big, lavish, kind of all-encompassing kind of epic that would just leave crowds stunned and just a bit swept along, for a truly epic runtime. And it was meant to be truly epic. I think his original cut was well over 5 hours. I basically said, I think Cimino had final cut and he'd changed the locks on the editing room door by that point. So no executive could come in and interfere with anything like that.
Sam, do you mind if I interject real quick?
Go on.
Whenever we're saying original cut, is this the assembly cut or the actual cut of the film?
This was an actual cut that he wanted to have released. We're not talking about literally everything he films kind of put in a rough chronological order.
Yeah. Kieran, can you give a quick definition of an assembly cut within production?
I'm not a post-production person. You've got about 300 different terms. You've got rough cut, you've got assembly cut, you've got a final cut, a producer's cut, director's cut, all the lot. So I could look it up and give you a very quick definition of assembly cuts again. And it may be that, different countries use different definitions of things as well. Especially between the US and the UK. It's a rough cut or first assembly or assembly cut is the editor's first cut of the entire movie. So the editor will essentially take all the footage, string it all together, just very roughly in place, and then it will be to everyone to go, yes, we like this, like start trimming it down and things like that. And quite often you will get directors that one of the things in like the contracts that have been taken on is, do you get director's cut? Who gets the final cut, essentially? And that's famously one of the things I think John Carpenter asked for when he did Halloween. He goes, I want two things in the contract. I want final cut and I want my name on the title. Who gets essentially to decide what version of the film goes out is a massive point of contention between the directors and the producers.
And obviously after Deer Hunter, basically, Jimeno basically had kind of right to kind of ask for that or to kind of demand it, essentially, because he was just seen as like the new golden boy. So basically, even though that was in his contract, basically, United Artists just said, right, fine, you can stamp your feet all right, which we're not going to release anything of that length. So he gradually had to whittle it down over many months and go through his, his miles and miles of footage and which sounds something more manageable, ends up being about 3.5 hours.
More manageable.
But the film in general, it's basically, broad strokes, is a lot of rich landowners in Wyoming declare war on Johnson County, which is this area of the state that's basically become home to like a lot of European immigrant settlers who are basically struggling to kind of scratch out a living off the land, and they're near enough starving and having to steal some cattle and just make the best of what they can with the little kind of plot of lands they've got. But these rich landowners, they just want to expand to that area, and they thought, well, these won't just be to kill them all. So basically they brand all these immigrants as criminals and potential cattle rustlers to give them an excuse to hire a lot of bounty hunters to go after them. And the only people defending these immigrants from this kind of atrocity is Chris Christopherson, who's the marshal of the area, and basically his band of kind of associates, more morally upright associates, who basically mount a bit of a vast stand against all these rich, horrible people, basically, who claim they've got like the sanction of the US president, which I think is something that they invented for the film. This did happen, but not quite in the way kind of this film has it. I think they do basically make the baddies badder than they actually were, and kind of get rid of any kind of nuance. But essentially, that's kind of like the canvas we're working on, and we're following. Chris Christopherson's marshal is. Local bordello madam, is like his on again, off again kind of romantic partner. Got Christopher Walken as a local bounty hunter who kind of has a bit of a change of heart, and he's Christopherson's old friend, so he ends up fighting for the good guys. And Jeff Bridges is like the local kind of community leader.
I forgot Jeff Bridges was in this.
who play a character with the surname Bridges by happy coincidence. I mean, these are all loosely based on real people, but I think their actual involvements in the events are either exaggerated or combined, or there's a fair bit of dramatic license taken. But he's got probably the most memorable line in the whole film, when this death list has gone out, and trying to work out kind of what to do, how to fight back, and is there anything that can be done. And he just makes the point, says it's getting dangerous to be poor in this country. So it's obviously it's got these like this big kind of social message, and like potentially big weighty themes that would have like a kind of a powerful impact on viewers if the kind of film itself kind of was a bit more engaging, kind of on arrival, like its final form. I'm not going to say this is a bad film, but I'll come back to that. But so United Artists as a company that kind of they're founded in the early 20s, I think, by basically a collective of basically their brand is like a studio formed by artists for artists, basically. So Charles Chaplin, D.W. Griffiths, a few others basically formed the company, and they're famous for essentially just leaving auto directors alone. Basically, if you wanted to get your dream project made and you kind of enough for a name, you could go to them, and generally they would kind of give you what you needed, and then kind of look ahead to like kind of if they're left to their own device, then the final product will be better, be more kind of insightful. But they quickly began to worry about Cimino here, and just the kind of the sheer amount of money he was seemingly wasting just on quite frivolous things. I mean, there's like an old kind of, it might be apocryphal, but it's quite a few sources. Basically, they say by the fifth day he was already 4 days behind schedule. So it's like it was just his obsession over like little details and kind of things not being quite right, or just basically just he just dug further and further into a hole.
Going like full Kubrick standard.
Yeah, literally. I mean, Kubrick and Finch to an extent, they're famous for like the multiple takes, but no, Cimino I think had 56 takes on Chris Christopherson waking up in a drunken stupor and cracking a whip at like people at his doorway. And every shot seems to be more or less identical, but it's just something about that each time the way the whip was like flashing across the camera or something just wasn't quite right, wasn't quite up to his standards. That was like a whole day's filming of just doing that like half a second shot basically.
It reminds me, there's a story when they were making Blade Runner, apparently the producers were getting very uptight about Ridley Scott taking ages to do anything. So he made a shot of Harrison Ford dropping some chopsticks in his bowl of noodles about 18 times just for the point of it, just to annoy them.
Yeah. I mean he's... so I think he was nicknamed the Ayatollah on set because he was just so kind of dictatorial and just kind of uncompromising. But it's like there's like stories like him waiting for a particular attractive cloud, to drift into view, before he did his next, he set up his next shot, or that classic thing of waiting for magic hour, and just. Again,
it's raining that day. Oh, okay, we're gonna have to wait till tomorrow.
By the time I was like set up the shot, then like the lights gone and all that. He apparently ordered like an entire set, like a street set, so like buildings on either side to be torn down and reset up because in his words it didn't look quite right. He couldn't. It really couldn't kind of articulate more than that. Just it didn't look right to him. And I think they ended up moving it back like a couple of feet, and then it was the same otherwise. He seemed to be happy after that. He built irrigation channels under like a massive field where the final battle was going to take place, so the grass would be greener to better contrast with the fake blood spilt on the grass.
It sounds like when a film has to have like a movie being made in the film, they want an uptight director. It's just a caricature of every time.
I mean, films about making films, telling like the story, would generally irritate me, but I do generally think this would make a fantastic movie.
Didn't he build a whole town too?
Yeah. I mean, this was like one of the streets they tore down for it because again, it didn't look quite right. Yeah, I mean, it's. I mean, to be fair to him, you can see it in the end result. It does look good, just the production, the sheer production value, the level of detail on the costumes and the sets, everything looks authentic and of the period and everything like that. But I just can't stop thinking about just the misery to put all these craftspeople through and all this cast and everyone involved. It basically was like director's word is law, but. And even if you subscribe to the auteur theory, obviously you just need, just so many people working on the movie, and it must have been absolutely unbearable. And watching the final like products, I can't, basically it's all very well acted, although I probably understood less than half of what Chris Christopherson was saying because it's just a very particular style of performance, very kind of grounded and mumbly and unadorned.
It's mumblecore.
Basically, it's just I can't believe actually they managed to get Jeff Bridges and Chris Christopherson, who were basically like, apart from like probably about 10 years age between them, they look like the same person basically. Especially when they've both got a beard, they've both got long hair, they both mumble. They just it's a good job they're wearing different hats in this, so I'd have struggled. But yeah, like the final kind of film, it's like overall acted, and it's production values, level of craft, is very impressive. But it's 3.5 hours. Well, the cut I watched is 3.5 hours. So that's the version they did about 10 years ago, which is meant to approximate what he was going for, because the the first release version, which is about 3.5 hours again, was not well received, to put it mildly, and then they whittled it down to 2.5 hours after that, and I think that was even more poorly received, except for in France for some reason where they quite liked it. But yeah, the 3.5 hours version I saw probably feels at least twice as long. It's very monotonous and really hard work, and as good as the actors are, I find it hard to care about any of them. Really, I just find it really hard to engage with the story, and it just lots of time spent on kind of inconsequential things, and just it's probably all just build kind of the whole kind of atmosphere and the tone of the thing, and just get you into that world. But half the time you're thinking, why am I sitting in this room? Why don't I watch something more interesting? They're not even talking about like what they're trying to do. They're just stuff, just general Western town stuff is happening, and
general Western town stuff is happening.
I'm
putting that in a script at some point. I'm going to write a Western in there. It's just going to be general Western town stuff is happening.
I mean, Chris Christopherson. I was just going to say, Chris Christopherson in an interview kind of theorised that this was this film's eventual failure was used. He said, but it was used by the powers that be to stop a way of filmmaking where the author, the director, was in control of the money. So that's the key thing.
I was going to ask, what about the financial side of it, the box office and the budget and all that? Because the budget is those is famously what is derailed the entire thing.
I mean, basically, because kind of deadlines kept being kind of broken and extended, and Cimino kept spending time on various things. The film exceeds its planned production schedule by 3 months, which caused the budget to inflate from 12 million to 44 million, and it only made 3.5 million back at the box office after all that. Oh my god! Yeah, so that was in its initial run. That was this like 80 to 81. It kind of clawed back a little bit more, like various cuts over the years, but basically it was just a massive money pit essentially. I mean,
nobody wanted to go see it. What's the point?
Basically, I mean, the critics. It was like being reported on throughout. The amount of time it's taken, things were going wrong. It was reaching like the press, and so I think the critics were basically sharpening their knives before it came out. But they were kind of vindicated, and it was almost like them all piling on to who could kind of savage it most, kind of wittily. I mean, I think
I do remember there. Sorry, being tabloid reports, right, like that. And if you're about to get into it.
I mean, Pauline Kael called it. I mean, it's a good line. I don't really quite know what she means by it. She described it as a movie you want to deface. I mean, what's she advocating for there? That people break into projection rooms and scratch up all the film?
I mean, I've watched some films over in my time that I've wanted physically to throw stuff at and do stuff. Halloween. But
this so John Hurt is one of the supporting players. I mean, he was meant to be like co-lead with Chris Christopherson, but they had to rewrite it because he had other stuff to do. I mean, the film took so long to make. He started filming this, then went off to do Elephant Man, and then came back to finish this. He managed to make Elephant Man in its entirety in the time it took for this to kind of get
Cleopatra had something similar where it was taking so long. Richard Burton went off and did his part in The Longest Day. And came back and continued doing Cleopatra.
Yeah. Well, I thought you were going to say he got thin red lined, where he just got cut out of the movie.
Yeah. No, although jokes aside, that did happen to Willem Dafoe. He was meant to have it was meant to be his film debut, and I think apparently he is in the background of one shot, but essentially he was cut out because he had a big argument with Cimino. He ruined the shot, he ruined the take or something, so he fired the spot pretty much. But bless him, good spot that he is. He came back to narrate the documentary about what went wrong with this, which is on all the DVD and Blu-ray releases.
That's hilarious.
But throughout this, so Cimino shot more than 1.3 million feet, 400,000 meters, nearly 220 hours of film for this, costing the studio approximately 200,000 per day in salary, equivalent to 720,000 in 2022. And privately, it was joked that Cimino wanted to surpass Francis Ford Coppola's mark of shooting 1 million feet of footage for Apocalypse Now, and he did by 0.3 million.
Woo! Achieving goals.
That's a hell of a lot of money, although something I forgot to mention that I think is funny in terms of like the ludicrous amount spent on something. Apparently, when they were building all the massive sets and stuff in Italy for Cleopatra, they were building to such an extent that they caused a countrywide shortage of building materials and supplies because it was all going to make Cleopatra. And like, if you can like get rid of an entire country's supplies of construction materials for your sets, I think that's an impressive achievement.
Yeah, what do we call that? Italian neo-waste? I don't. There's something there.
Yeah. I mean, at the time, it was kind of hailed as like one of the worst films, kind of, around basically, and for years, it kind of that kind of persisted that it was kind of almost irredeemable. Had defenders like I think Scorsese and I think Tarantino, I think both kind of defenders, both fans of it, and.
Scorsese did have a personal stake in the idea of the auteur who has control of money.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't write down the name of the critic, but one of the best reviews of the time was again like dismissive, kind of witty kind of review. It's like I can't remember the critic, but it likens it to a 3-hour walking tour of your own living room.
Oh, why can't we have such terms and phrases for our reviews?
But since then, it's sort of been reevaluated a bit. It is in the Criterion Collection. It's it's had a bit of a revision over the years. 2015, BBC Culture ranked Heaven's Gate as 98th on its list of 100 greatest 100 greatest American films of all time. It's. Yeah, I can't say it's one of the worst films I've ever seen. It's just for the amount of effort and the amount of kind of trauma Cimino puts everyone involved through. Including a lot of animals. It's got a really bad reputation for animal abuse on set. I mean, again, it's just this
horses.
Kind of horses and cows, and they're just treated very inhumanely and slaughtered needlessly, and not good. It's one of its enduring legacies. Actually, it was one of the films to make it a legal requirement to have animal welfare people on Hollywood productions, basically. So after this, but just after all that, it's like he kind of Cimino was an perfectionist, fair enough. He was like trying to achieve his dream. He had his vision, and he was going to achieve it no matter what. But kind of at what cost? It's like directors, they bear the responsibility to make their art the best art it can be, but it's not at the expense of your entire crew. Everyone involved in your film. Your studio. It's like. I know it's like studios today, especially they get like a lot of bad press, for being greedy and all about the money and everything. But it's a business. Hollywood is a business, and even your golden child, can't be given like endless latitude. It's got to be reined in sooner or later. And basically, after this, after being like the new hope for the future, this real promising auto director, basically this. Killed his career. He did work again, but none of his other films were as well received, and pretty much all of them kind of were damp squibs at the box office. Basically, there's 5 or other 6 films he did after this.
Yeah. And again, it is a business, and I will quote John Borman, who I've just looked at the quote for because I know the quote, I can't remember who did it. He was a British director in the day who said, filmmaking is the process of turning money into light back into money again. Which is some of the ages, but...
and Cimino turned money into lights and more lights, and then lots of waste.
More light. They kept going. The film kept running. There's more life.
Yeah.
So I will recommend the documentary on it, though, if you'd prefer to just watch that. I think it's Final Cut.
the documentary is fascinating. I mean, it's based on the book. The book is apparently it's a warts and all kind of account, and the documentary is kind of sums it all up very nicely. And tellingly, the only people who were involved that actually got to comment on the film, I think, was the production designer who got the only Oscar the film won. So it did get an Oscar. It's like for basically for just the level of craft involved, which was well deserved. A couple of the producers who seemed very bitter about it, understandably, Chris Christopherson and Jeff Bridges, who both kind of see merits in it. But they both think it's like among the best things either of them have done, which is interesting. So
I think you can always tell that a movie had madness behind the scenes when a documentary is made about it about 10 years later. Yeah. that's how you know the production wasn't smooth.
Yeah, I mean, as much as I love Apocalypse Now, I think I probably love Hearts of Darkness just as much. It's just as interesting and engaging, In
which case, we should probably start wrapping this up sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
But I do want to ask one general question, which is what all of these films we said, they're massive films at the time, but they come to be kind of reconsidered as the years go on. So do you think things like John Carter of Mars in like 20 years time, I mean, it's happening with the prequels now. Is it just like a time thing that after a certain amount of time kind of our opinions of something lessen? Or are there going to be films now that you think are awful that in 40 years time are still going to be regarded as absolutely atrocious?
I do want to clarify, for the prequels, it's really only having a meme and like internet fandom revival, not so much actual critical reappraisal.
I was going to say, Attack of the Clones is still dire.
People younger than us who were still kids when the prequels came out. Actually, I suppose you'd have been a kid when the prequels came out, wouldn't you, Kieran? But
actually, I'd like to point out I wasn't a massive Star Wars person. I only watched the originals probably when I was about 9 or 10. And I only watched the prequels when I was about 16, 17.
My point was going to be, you've got an affection for whichever Star Wars you saw first when you were a child. Yeah. So, like, even though, yes, the Phantom Menace did come out when I was 9, I had seen the original trilogy before that, thanks to my dad, so that I hold all of that kind of in greater affection, even though I did like the prequels as a kid, and I still think they're kind of all right now. I'll still watch them happily.
There's an easy way to watch the prequels, which makes it infinitely better, which is simply play the Lego Star Wars version.
Yeah, fair.
That's it. That's all we have to do. But yeah, things like John Carter and Mars and stuff like that, which is, the modern flop, things like The Flash, things like Quantum Mania. Do you think they're going to be reconsidered?
Yeah, I mean, I think anything that ends up on a streaming service now, it's probably going to be difficult because I think because films are released and consumed so differently now, I don't know whether much reappraisal happens. I mean, we don't even know how long things are going to stay on streaming services now before they're locked away. I mean, anything owned by Disney now could be taken off Disney Plus at a moment's notice.
You can't find New York.
Yeah, there's a reason why film archivists, everything's being filmed on digital now, but because we just haven't had digital technology long enough to know how long it lasts. And we know that celluloid lasts about 65, 70 years before it starts to massively degrade. There is a reason why you get all these digital films, and the film archivists are transferring the digital files onto physical celluloid. Completely reversing, because it could be that in 40 years' time, the digital files just die. Therefore, we've got it surviving for 65 years on celluloid.
Kieran, I also think here we have sort of a selection bias for popularity, for iconic figures, and those other movies, the sort of modern ones, not the Star Wars ones, of course, but like the John Carter, Tomorrowland, Flash, things like that. They don't really have the cinephilic cultural gravitas to really merit even bothering. Like, I don't think anybody's going to be going, you know what was actually a masterpiece? That franchise failure, sort of sci-fi, people, they're just not going to be doing that.
So go ahead.
I mean, I will say my mate Liam asked a question for this, and it was me find. And basically, his question was, "WTF is wrong with the people who didn't go to see Matrix Resurrections?" Now,
was Matrix it in theaters?
Yes.
Oh,
And actually, I would say that the people that didn't go to see Matrix Resurrections were spared.
Oh.
2.5 hours of absolute dire, just like the only reason it was made is because Warner Brothers said we're going to make this, and every one of the Wachowskis that did it went, I'd rather do it than you do it. And it's just a running joke of, oh look, the Matrix is a thing inside the Matrix that gets old after about 15 minutes. It's so bad. I hate it.
But stuff like, like the Wachowskis, unfortunately, like the last few films haven't really set the box office on fire. So they did Matrix, and before that it was Jupiter Ascending, and before that it was Cloud Atlas. And they've dropped for various reasons. But I think they're interesting enough filmmakers to possibly, that may be, in years to come, that those kind of things may be reevaluated. So at least there's some interesting ideas in there, even if it doesn't entirely work.
For me on Matrix Resurrections, I actually liked it, but I only saw it in streaming, so I didn't see it in theaters because of COVID.
I was so excited for it.
It was the last thing I saw in cinema before Christmas, because it was released just before Christmas. It was like the 20th of December or something. And I took myself to a cinema. I watched it in a room full of really annoying teenagers, just wouldn't shut the hell up and stop taking selfies. But I still, I got something out of it. I thought it was an interesting tweak to the formula for me. But yeah, we're in this kind of world. But yeah, a very limited number of these kind of films, if they do flop, likelihood is they're never going to be reconsidered, or we're never going to kind of see them kind of make a splash again. Really, they've had their shot and that's it. Unless they just try reboot the same kind of idea in like another decade's time.
Okay. I guess we should be wrapping up, but I'll do a final question around. What film has come out in the last few years that you think in 25, 30 years' time will get reappraised as a flop? If you had to make a prediction.
We're
all just like, no, we hate it.
I mean...
I'm just getting my list up. Just give me a sec.
I'll take an easy one, and there's going to be someone in 25, 30 years who writes, Babylon is better than people think it is, or thought it was, or whatever.
The people are doing that already.
Right, yeah. I think we did an episode on that. It's one that I think fits this mold of premiere director. The film came out at a weird time. It wasn't popular. It didn't make a lot of money. So,
and you know what? I'm going to say, as much as I'm still about it, and it's not as amazing as everyone said it is, I think Tenet will find its feet. I think a lot of it is just that people missed it because of COVID. And it is Inception light, but
Liam says cats.
Well, I think that's already found its audience, hasn't it? Blade Runner 2049, obviously, that tanks at the box office, but I think that's already very kind of well regarded, isn't it? But critically, at least, anyway. I mean, maybe for all me saying, that kind of you can't do this in the world of streaming anymore. Maybe John Carter. I mean, the main problem with that was it's unfortunate enough to finally get made after all of the films that were inspired by the book. From like 100 years earlier. It's like that was just bad luck, really bad timing.
Why was that movie's budget so big? I don't understand.
I think I smell an episode coming.
Okay. I mean, sorry to be a broken record, parody myself, but I'm going to say Speed Racer. I think, again, people are already starting to reappraise that slightly. And again, back to the Wachowskis.
Quantum of Solace.
That's fair.
Yeah, I'm going to say Speed Racer. I don't think people knew what they had at the time.
Yeah. All right, cool. Well... that is our discussion of film flops and a large variety. We got recent. We have our main ones. We had some good questions in here. And thank you so much, Liam, for watching and submitting a question. Anybody, you can feel free to do that, and we will answer. because
we'll try to if there's a way in for it. You know?
Yes, it's easier than coming up with them ourselves. Yeah, that is going to do it for this episode of Second Cut. But we will be back next week with Greg's suggestion of film scores.
We don't know how we're going to do it, but we will be discussing movie scores at the very least.
Yes, and I'm not a music person, so I think I'll mostly just be talking about the movie and then try and give some background on the guy and all that.
Have I got to bring out my music GCSE?
Yes.
Oh, God.
So, guys, before we head out, where can people find you online?
You can find me at SSB Thinks Film and at the Film Magazine. Do check out all of our lists, our top 10 film lists that we previously discussed, because they're all up there, and links to all the writers' profiles, and just get to know us a bit. There's a really good, really interesting kind of variety of choices on there from our team.
Yeah, and you can find me at KJudgmental across the interwebs if you really want to, stalkers, and. Yeah, go check out the team's pages that we've got up because they look great. We now look vaguely professional. I should say that no, we're the most professional. We're more professional than Empire. Screw you. Sight and Sound, Kaye got yeah, and obviously over the next few weeks we're going to be pumping out a load of stuff. It's October, so the three of us are out. Like, we can do this with our eyes closed. We're into the horror month, and then. So, yeah, we should have a lot of stuff coming out. Just keep updated with that.
Yep, and you can follow me at Jacob Film Guy. My upcoming stuff is actually all Scorsese related. So I will just be continuing this episode. Yeah, I'm most excited for Killers of the Flower Moon this month. So that will do it. Be sure to go check out our Film Magazine Redbubble store. We could really use the support right now. We're not a non-profit, but we might as well be, because all of our money goes to running the website, keeping it online. Joe does such a great job. So much work and effort put in, from the web design to the editing to the video work. I mean, the graphic design. The dude he's an octopus.
He's a one-man army, and if ever output from the TFM drops for a week or two, it's probably because he's resting or in hospital recovering. It's that kind of thing. So as much support we can get.
Yes. So go buy our stuff, donate, PayPal. Those are both in the description below.
And you'll get some cool-looking stickers and T-shirts and mugs and stuff.
Absolutely,
movie nerd stuff.
Next time we will try to be under 2 hours. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.